One of my most popular videos was the video I produced on cosmic fine-tuning, in which I talked about how life-prohibiting universes are vastly more probable than life-permitting universes, and how the physical constants of the universe, constants such as the strength of gravity, strength of electromagnetic interaction, and so forth and so on, have been set to an incredibly fine degree so as to support life, that how we live on a razor's edge of incredible fineness, and how this seems to indicate cosmic design. Now, needless to say, this produced a lot of irate responses, and that should come as no surprise, because whenever you suggest that there is a designer to the universe, that there is a God out there, it will tend to push people's buttons, and some people will respond, well, negatively, and some will respond angrily. Some of the responses I received were really quite foolish, but some were more thought-provoking. The foolish responses were really kind of absurd. For example, several people said, well, surely some other form of life would have emerged if the constants had been different. And one person, in fact, was adamant. He's saying, other forms of life would have come about anyway. You know, you're going to have to prove that. You're going to have to support that claim. Consider the nature of the changes that would result from these changes in the physical constants. Tell me what life would be like if there were no atoms forming, or if there was no hydrogen, if only the heavier atoms were to emerge, and so forth and so on. Consider, for example, the strong nuclear force, which binds protons together in an atom, binds protons to neutrons, and therefore prevents the nucleus from exploding apart due to electromagnetic repulsion, electric repulsion. If the strong nuclear force had been only 1% stronger, then almost all the carbon would have burned up into oxygen. An increase of only 2% would prevent protons from existing, thus preventing any atoms from forming at all. Conversely, if you tune the strong nuclear force down a little bit, by only 5%, for example, then no atoms could form either. And this argument did not come from religious sources by any means. It came from the physics community. Now tell me what life would be like if no atoms could form. Tell me what type of life would emerge. Tell me what type of life would emerge if, say, there is no carbon. Is it possible something else would have come about? Well, you know, maybe, but you're going to have to provide evidence for that. I want to go where the evidence points rather than pick a desired goal and then come up with evidence to support it. One person said, well, you fail to understand how incredibly large the universe is. You know what? Doesn't matter how large the universe is. If you don't have atoms forming, if you don't have carbon, if you don't have the fundamental building blocks necessary for life, all the size of the size of the universe is not going to help you at all. There were some more intelligent questions that were posed, though, questions that were more reasonable and more thought-provoking, and I'd like to tackle a few of those. I appreciate the people who sent in these questions, or comments or objections, as the case may be. One person said, if the universe was finely tuned, why don't we see more life? Why don't we see a whole lot more life than we already do? You know what, that's an interesting question, but I don't think it defeats the appearance of design. That's like coming across a watch in the desert and then asking yourself, wait a minute, I only see one watch here. Why don't I see dozens or hundreds of watches? Surely this watch can't have been designed. Nobody would accept such an argument. It's a legitimate question to ask, why don't we see more life out there? But the fact that we don't see more life out there doesn't mean that life was not designed. For all you know, there may be some reason out there. For all you know, the universe was created the way it was so that we'd have a chance to explore it later on. Or maybe it's just to give us something to sink our scientific curiosity into. Who knows? It's a question that merits further philosophical inquiry. It does not defeat the appearance of design. People often ask, well, if life was designed, why are human bodies so frail? Why do human bodies break down? Why do species go extinct? Why do you have sickle cell anemia and myopia and so forth and so on, cancer? Those are valid questions as well. Or that's a valid question, but you know, it's like coming across a wristwatch that doesn't keep perfect time. Nobody would look at that watch and say, well, this watch doesn't function perfectly, so it can't possibly have been designed. Why it doesn't function perfectly is again a matter of further philosophical inquiry, but it doesn't defeat the appearance of design. Just because something doesn't work perfectly. There could be reasons as well. In fact, that's related to the philosophical problem known as the problem of evil. Why does God allow evil and suffering in the world? I refer people to Alvin Plantinga's work in which he tackled this. Suffice to say that modern day philosophers no longer consider the existence of evil and suffering to be necessarily incompatible with the existence of God. In fact, Plantinga offers comments, which I might discuss in another video, about how evil and suffering have a way of driving us to the Lord. Some people say, well, maybe there's some way to unify all these constants. Maybe these constants are just the result of one massive equation. And that's why they interact so precisely. I don't see how that helps us. First of all, there's no evidence for such a massive equation. Some people are trying to unify all these constants by resorting to string theory and M theory. To cut the long story short, it's getting us nowhere, and at best it would only, make life slightly more probable, but still tremendously improbable. Second, that would still raise the question, why do you have a law that forces life to become probable? Why is there such a law in the first place? That law itself, whatever law unifies all of these constants, would itself have to show signs of incredible fine-tuning. It would scream out for design. One person said, we have no idea what the possible range of valid values are. What are the possible valid values for gravity, for example? That's a good question, but first of all, notice how we determined these constants are finely tuned. I talked about the strong nuclear force, how deviations of 1 or 2% can prevent life from occurring. Even if you grant that, even without knowing what the range of possible values are, just noting that a tiny variation would nullify the existence of life is itself indicative of design. Second, in order to claim that there is a narrow range of possible values, one would have to invoke the existence of some unknown law, which first of all we have no evidence for, and second, would itself indicate design if such a law existed. Right now there's no good reason to believe that you can't have an infinite number of values, infinite range of values of all these constants. And the fact that they are set so precisely and within the narrow bandwidth needed for life to exist is extremely improbable. One person said, well, human beings have a way of seeing patterns, of imagining patterns. And they can look up into the sky, for example, and see maybe a bunny rabbit. And maybe that's what we're doing here. Maybe it just seems like there's a pattern to the universe because we tend to imagine it. You know what? It's one thing to see a picture of a bunny rabbit up in the cloud formations in the sky. Life is not like that, though. The level of interaction required for life to exist is many times more precise, many times more intricate. It would be more like seeing the entire final battle scene of Star Wars acted out in the cloud formations. No sane person would look at that and say, we just tend to see patterns where they don't really exist.